What is going on, YouTube? It is Primitive here, and today we're going to be having a little bit different of a video. Today we're going to be going over all the tips and tricks that I have for you to beat Blue Hybrid in the BT7 metagame. Now, this is a deck that I have hundreds, if not thousands, of games on and against, and so I've been able to find a lot of little weaknesses in the Blue Hybrid game plan that I want to go ahead and share with you. So before we get on into that, let's go ahead and look at what we're going to be getting into in this video. And here's what we're going to be getting into in today's video. We are going to be going in order that you see it here. So if you wanted to go ahead and skip ahead to a certain part, or if you've already watched the video and you're coming back for some review, you can go ahead and go to whichever part you want me to go over once again for you. But with that being said, let's get into the first portion of the video. So the first thing that we're going to be getting into are memory blockers and gaining memory on your opponent's turn. These are going to be super detrimental for Blue Hybrid because one of the biggest things Blue Hybrid wants to do is to be able to manipulate the memory on their turn however they wish with things like Hammer Spark, Bokomon, Howling Memory Boost, stuff like that. So by having ways to negate them from being able to gain memory outside of Tamer effects is going to put a huge damper in their plan. Memory blockers like Gazimon and Madoki Betamon are just so good. You're able to shut off so many cards in the deck. There'll be times where Blue Hybrid will have 2 or 3 cards in their hand that gain the memory like Hammer Sparks, and they're just going to be borderline unplayable because you're going to have the memory blockers out. It's really also going to shorten their turns, especially if you're able to play around Sworjo, so that way the only memory that they're really able to gain is off of the Davis, which is going to make their turns not as scary. Now, an honorable mention is going to be Digivolution blockers. A lot of people like the Digivolution blockers in the hybrid meta because it makes it so things like Beowulf and Jet Sylphie still have to cost 3 to Digivolve, and although they are okay in the Blue Hybrid matchup, they are not as nearly as good as the memory blockers because Blue Hybrid has so much ways to gain memory and manipulate their memory that having to pay 3 to go into Beowulf a lot of the times isn't going to be that big of a deal, just because they can gain the memory to make up for the 2 extra memory that they have to spend with those on the board. So as much as they are good, if you can naturally play them, they are going to be nice, but memory blocker is going to be much more potent because it has way more cards to shut down. Syakomon's going to shut down the Beowulf 2 to play. They can still play the Beowulf, they're just going to have to devolve for 3, as to where with the memory blockers, you're shutting off multiple cards, especially Howlings. If they come out of security or if they play them, then they're not going to be able to get that memory gain as well, and so they are very crucial. Next up are going to be Tamers that gain memory on your turn, such as Mimi and Purple Kari. These cards are very good. Mimi essentially negates Hammer Sparks. If your opponent's going to play Hammer Spark to gain 1 memory, you can go and tap memory to gain that memory back, and then they're going to have to use 2 Hammer Sparks to get the effectiveness of 1 Hammer Spark, making this super good. I have actually put this in my main Blue Hybrid list just for the Blue Hybrid mirror because it's so powerful. Not only does it stop opponents' Hammer Sparks, but it also just helps your game plan naturally if you're playing option cards in your deck. For example, as Blue Hybrid, when I Hammer Spark, I can tap Mimi and make that Hammer Spark gain me 2. Or if I'm playing something like Green Hybrid, I can play Thunder Laser to tap Mimi, and Thunder Laser is free. And if you have the Izzy on board, you can go ahead and gain a memory off of it. So it's not a card that's super clunky if you're not playing against Blue Hybrid, because if you're playing option cards, you can gain a lot of value off of Mimi. And it's also just a card that's going to be very valuable versus Blue Hybrid and a lot of other decks in the current format, such as Purple, because they're going to be playing things like Jackraid, which you can negate with the Mimi, or you can also just make it so that they're 1-cost options like Deathclaw cost 2, or you can play it against things like Yellow Hybrid, which are going to be playing big option cost cards like Schwartz, and you can make it so it gets you an extra memory so you can have longer turns. It's just a very good card. It's going to be very good against Blue because anything to stop their memory gain is going to be very good, and Mimi is just very good at it because, like I said, they have to use 2 Hammer Sparks to get the effectiveness of 1, and that's going to make them have to use a lot more resources that they don't want to use to get very little gain. Then also there are cards like Neo Devimon. Neo Devimon's making it so that you gain 3 memory when your opponent plays a Tamer. Now obviously they can play around this by having the Madoki Betamon, but if they don't have the Madoki on the field, or you're able to get rid of the Madoki on the field, then the Neo Devimon can just make it so things like Tommy cost 6 to play, Davis cost 7 to play. This is going to make it super detrimental because in turns where they want to play a 3-cost Tamer so that way they can go to 0, it's actually going to put you to 3. If they wanted to choke you at 1 with Davis, it's actually going to put you at 4 because you're going to gain another 3. So Neo Devi is a super potent card that is very strong in the Blue Hybrid matchup. It's super annoying in the side deck metagame. We saw this a lot going into Blue Hybrid. I thought it was fairly potent. I had to essentially counter side deck for this card because it was so good, especially if they're able to get rid of your Madokis. And so this is a card that you can definitely consider if you're playing any sort of purple deck. You could definitely put in Neo Devimon. Now obviously the cards that are on the screen here are all purple, and there are other cards that you can play that aren't purple, like the memory blockers are going to come in multiple colors, but purple cards are just very good at gaining memory or stopping memory gain on your opponent's turn, which is going to be very effective versus blue hybrid. So if you can fit in these type of cards, it's going to be very beneficial for you. Then to piggyback off the memory blockers that we were just talking about, if you have a memory blocker on the board and you have enough swings to go in for game, a lot of the times you're going to be very safe versus blue hybrid. A lot of people are going to be scared to swing in just because blue hybrid has such strong security, but the thing is most of the strength of the security is going to come from tamers such as Sorjo and Tommy, as well as memory gain cards such as Hammer Spark and Ice Wall. But if you have a memory blocker on the field, Hammer Spark and Ice Wall are going to be negated, and then for the most part the tamers are not going to be able to stop your game plan from going in if you're attacking. Obviously, if you're going for big checks with something like Doragoromon and you hit Tommy, it is going to slow down your checks. But if you just have, let's say, 4 rookies on the board and they have 3 security, then going in and swinging for game is going to be relatively safe, because for as far as removal cards that can actually come out and remove Digimon off the board from security, it's mostly just going to be Supreme Cannon, which is played at most as a one-of. Most of the other removal, such as Rattlestar and Cocytus Breath, has kind of been phased out of the metagame, and the current removal being played, such as things like Forbidden Trident, add to your hand, and Aqua Viper adds to your hand, as to where only Supreme Cannon is going to activate out of security, and it's not going to happen that often. Not every deck is playing it, and if they do, like I said, it's only pretty much a one-of. So if they have 3 security left and you have 4 Digimon on the board, you can go get those 3 swings and swing in with the 4th for game. Most of the time it's going to be very free. There are a lot of times where I'll be playing against people and they'll be in those exact scenarios where they have the memory blocker out, and I know that if they just swing, they're going to win no matter what, but they'll be afraid of security, thinking that something's going to come out, but there's no cards outside of Supreme Cannon, which is going to be able to actually end their attacks. It makes so they can't go in for game. So if you do have the memory blocker out and you do have the swings to go in for game, 99% of the time it's going to be safe for you to go in. Very little are you going to be punished by the Supreme Cannon just because of the inconsistency of it, but that's kind of the risk that you should take, because the longer of time that you give the blue hybrid opponent, the more that they're going to be able to strip and stun you and be able to potentially come back from the game. So you want to try and go ahead and just end them if you can, and memory blockers are a great way to go about that. The biggest weakness for blue hybrid decks, in my opinion, is going to be big stack decks such as Jesmon, Doragoromon, and Red Hybrid. These decks are going to build up and raising, be able to come out and swing for 2, 3, 4, 5 checks in a turn, being able to clear massive amounts of your security, putting you at a huge disadvantage. And for example, with like Red Hybrid, when that Digimon does go down with the Ancient Greymon, they are going to be able to play another Digimon after. So even if you're able to get rid of it, they are able to replace it with another Digimon. So when you're able to swing these 3, 4, 5 checks in a turn without the option of blue hybrid being able to stun you, you're going to be able to get a large aggressive advantage. You're going to make it so once they have 1 or 2 security left, all you're going to really need is to be able to promote one more time, swing, maybe go in for 1 or 2 hybrids, and you have game right there. And you're playing with cards that your opponent can't stun because they can't affect the raising area. So when it comes to big stack decks, those are the decks I'm the most afraid of. When we do play in a side deck metagame, a large portion of my side deck is put towards these big stack decks, because it really just comes down to, is blue hybrid security good enough to be able to help them survive? If you're playing against Doragoromon X Antibody and you don't hit Tommy in blue hybrid security, then they basically have very little ways to be able to get rid of Doragoromon, and since you're going to have so many resources, it's also going to be very hard for them to strip all those resources and stun it. So if it survives, which it's almost 100% going to be able to, and then they go in for something like Final Zubigon Punch, then there's nothing really that you can do, because the Digimon's going to survive. They're going to be able to get that last check that they didn't get next turn, and then all they really need is a rookie to come out of raising or a hybrid on top of a tamer. So these big stack decks are going to be a problem for blue hybrid because it's not very much in their control. It's a lot of the times going to have to come down to the strength of their security, so being able to hit things like Hammer Spark, Ice Wall, and Tommy to be able to slow down or end checks, and that's just not something that's in your control, because there's no way to manipulate your security as a blue hybrid player. Sure, you could play recovery cards like Magnadramon if you wanted, but you still don't get to choose what cards are in your security. So it's still kind of a gamble if you're going to be able to have a good enough security to be able to win. Yes, if you're able to get Tommy to come out and strip the sources and end their attacks 1 or 2 checks early and then threaten to stun next turn, then yes, you're going to be in a great position. But if you don't get that, if you don't get the Sorjo to help you strip and things like that, then the big Digimon is going to survive going into their next turn. They're going to be able to get those extra checks and go in for game. And so that's what makes it so hard for blue hybrid, is just the fact that they can't stun it preemptively. The only counterplay they have to it is their 1 of Ice Wall, and then the card's going to come out of raising, going to be able to swing all those checks, and then you're going to be at a huge security disadvantage, and then at that point it's going to be very hard for you to come back, because they're only going to need to be able to get 1 or 2 swings, while you have to get 6 swings in to go for game, while also stunning everything they get on the board. The next biggest weakness is going to be early wide board states. This is kind of a piggyback off of the big stack decks. If you're just able to get a big swing early and be able to get a bunch of checks early and make it so that your opponent has to play more defensively with their stun cards instead of being able to go on the offense, you're going to be in a good position. So cards such as the Izmon coming off the scatter mode early is going to be very good, because then you can either Digivolve on top of it into something like a Cerberusmon to be able to threaten to go into werewolf mode. You can put Ginkaku Promote on top of it for 1 and have Rush and be able to swing in. And so you can just get checks in with the scatter mode and then play Digimon after that once the scatter mode goes down, and use those Digimon to get extra swings in. Bushi Agumon and Shrubimon is also another way to go about this. If you swing in with the Shrubimon, get a check, and then it survives, and you play something like Deathclaw to pop your Shrubimon, and then you play out 2, 3, 4 Bushi Agumons, and then swing those in, then again, there's not really going to be any way for them to be able to counteract that, because they can't stun those yet, because they're being played on your turn, being able to attack with the Rush keyword. And so it's going to make things like that very good. Being able to have a wide board state early is going to be good. Now, obviously, a little bit later in the game, it's not going to be as good because of a Zulong, but we will get into that. But yes, very early, turn 2 to 3, being able to go 2, 3, 4 Digimon wide is going to make it very hard for Blue Hybrid to come back from, because you're just going to have a lot of aggressive presence, and a lot of times that early in the game, they're only going to be able to stun 2, maybe 3 Digimon a turn, and if they do, they're going to have to use a pretty big amount of resources in their Korikakumon. So if you're able to get rid of that stack, then they're going to be even farther behind. So yes, early aggression is also going to be very good. Now, something that I kind of touched on a little bit earlier is going to be hybrids in the raising area. These are just the 2 areas that your blue hybrid opponent isn't going to be able to touch. They can't stun tamers, they can't stun or strip source in the raising area, making these 2 very safe spots against blue hybrid's main mechanics of stunning and stripping. So if you can get your opponent down in security, then you can very safely build up things in the raising area, or put hybrids on top of your tamers to be able to go in for game, because just like most decks in this format, there isn't much tamer removal or ways to stop tamers. The only way to really play against your opponent going in for multiple hybrids and going for game is going to be Ice Wall, which is at 1, and with how much search is in blue hybrid, a lot of times is going to get put to the bottom anyway, so they're not even going to be able to play it. So there's not as much defensive play against that. So if you can, be sure to utilize your raising area. Be sure to utilize the fact that they can't touch your hybrids. So if you can save up your hybrids and your tamers for later in the game, then that's going to be very good for you. Obviously, if you need to use them early for different things, just to put yourself in a better position, then go for it. Don't just save your hybrids if it's going to put you at a disadvantage. But for the most part, hybrids are going to be good because they can't be stunned, and they can just go in for game when your opponent can't really play around it. Now, the next thing is blue hybrid has a very hard time coming back from a large security disadvantage. This is also something that I touched on a little bit, and that's just when your opponent is at maybe 2 or 3 security and you're at 5, it's going to be very hard for them to be able to come back from those security checks, because for blue hybrid, they're going to have to play defensively and stun stuff while also being able to make attacks, which is hard to get both to happen at the same time without threatening for your Digimon to go down, because you need to be able to preserve your things like Korikakumon with things like Beowulfmon, which might slow down the amount of Digimon that you can stun and stuff like that. And so you have to play very defensively, and if your opponent's playing aggressively, it's hard for you to match that aggression while being able to keep them at bay with their defense. And so if you're able to get a large security lead, you're going to be in a pretty good spot to be able to come in from raising, be able to swing for 1 or 2 checks, go in for hybrid for game, and set yourself up for a good game plan. And that's going to come from, like I said, you can get early wide aggression, you can build up big stacks, and just make it so that once your opponent is down by like 3 security, blue hybrid's going to have a hard time coming back for it, because the only really comeback potential that they have is going to be a Zulong as far as multiple swings. A lot of other decks have ways to get security attack +1 or even higher. As for blue hybrid, the only thing that you have is the Azulong, so make sure that you're playing around the Azulong, because that's really their only comeback potential. But just keep in mind, once you're ahead on large security swings, your opponent's going to have to play very defensively and not as aggressively, so it's going to give you time to build up the stack that you need, or build up the tamers that you need to be able to go in for game. Now, probably the most annoying cards for blue hybrid players, and I can say this from experience, is going to be self-removal cards, such as the ones we see on screen here with Aqua Viper, Deathclaw, and Tactical Retreat. Blue hybrid wants to be able to stun your cards with no sources, so that way you can gain memory off of Sorjo and starter deck Matt. It's kind of one of the main things that blue hybrid is trying to do. So if you have cards in your deck that is able to remove your own Digimon to play around that, it's going to put a huge damper in the blue hybrid's play. I can't tell you how many times I've played something like Howling Memory Boost to stun stun something on the board, make sure it has no sources, so I can gain 2 to 4 extra memory with Sorojo next turn. And then they play something like Tactical Retreat to get rid of that. And then now I'm going to go just to the 3 memory that I was going to get with my Davis, instead of going to the 5 or 7 that I was going to get with these Sorojos, which really changes how you're going to play the game. I even personally play Aqua Viper in my blue hybrid list just for the mirror match, because if they have something like my Pokemon on board being stunned and they're trying to gain Sorojo memory off that, I can go in Aqua Viper, bring it back to my hand, play around the Sorojo, while also being able to bounce back 2 of their level 4 lowers. So if they have something like Madoki and Syakomon on the board, not only am I playing around their Sorojo, but I'm also going to be slowing down their aggression and making it so they have to hard play these rookies once again, and essentially putting them back a turn or 2 and just denying them that Sorojo memory. And so it works very well. Same thing like when I was playing the Purple Eismon Rush, being able to just Deathclaw and put your opponent at 1 and not let them get that extra memory is something that's super powerful, and it's very strong. So these self-removal cards are just very good at playing around Sorojo, one of the key pieces of the blue hybrid. And so if you can fit these cards in, they are going to be fairly good in the metagame right now, just because they are super good against blue hybrid, and blue hybrid is the main deck, so it's going to make them automatically very good. And you have multiple cards. There are going to be a couple other cards than the ones that I have on screen that you can use. These are just going to be a couple of the main examples used in the metagame right now. Now, getting into the final tips that I have for you here, the first one is going to be don't attack an advantage. If your opponent has very little going for them, let's say they have a Sorojo on the board and that's it, and you're able to play around Sorojo by just digivolving and putting them at 1, then there's not much that they're going to be able to do. It's not really until they have things like Tommy and Davis out that they're really going to be able to start making big plays, because they just don't have the memory to be able to do it. So I've had multiple games where I'll have something like that. For example, I'll have just Sorojo on the board and my opponent can put me at 1 and choke me, but then they ended up swinging into security and hitting Davis, and now I just have a crazy game plan because I'm going to go to 3. That's going to allow me to go up into Beowulf now, or be able to go into Kumamon, Korikakumon, whatever I need to do to be able to start stripping sources. And if they were able to just wait 1, maybe 2 more turns while I was still really far behind to develop a little bit more, then they'd be at a much better spot to be able to just go in and swing for game. But then they swung in, hit something very valuable like Tommy, Davis, or maybe even something like Howling Memory Boost, and that's going to give me enough memory on my next turn to start gaining advantage. So if your opponent doesn't have anything going on for them next turn and you don't have to attack, then I probably wouldn't, just because Blue's hybrid security is so strong that you don't want to risk it. Obviously, if you're starting to fall behind, if they already have Davis and Sorojo out, then you don't have too much to lose. You can give them more Sorojos, but you're already in probably a disadvantage spot, so don't use this advice for that time. This is for when your opponent just doesn't have much going on. They had to digivolve on top of their only tamer to cycle. They have nothing really threatening to going on. In those positions, just build up, prepare for the future turns, and then start to swing in. Don't make sure you give them free advantage from their security. The next thing is going to be plan to be stunned and stripped of your sources. This kind of makes sense going into blue hybrid, but you do need to keep it in mind. I have players that I've played against that just make really desperate plays versus me to try and cycle through their deck or do something crazy, and they just end up getting all their sources stripped and stunned. For example, if you have something like a Jessmon deck and you have Savior Huckmon and Raising, but you don't have the Jessmon yet, you probably shouldn't promote your Savior Huckmon out, just so that next turn you can hatch and digivolve and get more cycle. You should leave that Savior Huckmon and Raising till you get the Jessmon, or you find another level 6, because if you promote Savior Huckmon out, I'm going to strip all the sources, I'm going to stun the Savior, so even if you do top deck the Jessmon, it's not going to be able to attack next turn because I just stunned it, and then I could potentially permanently stun it forever. And then if you do put Jessmon on top of it, I'm going to strip and stun that, as to where if you just left it in Raising, you'd be able to go into the Jessmon, you'd be able to swing in, be able to go for swing, maybe 2 checks, unsuspend, play a Sistermon, swing 2 checks, play a Sistermon. Now you have huge aggressive potential while also playing out a couple different Sistermons to go wide on the board. And so things like that are mistakes that I see some players play, is they just get a little desperate and they will promote too early, or they'll play cards that just play too much into them getting stunned because they need a certain inheritable that they need. So just make sure you're playing around this consistently. Don't make desperate plays and play around, well, I hope they don't have ways to strip my sources, because they just have way too many ways for that to be really realistic of them not being able to strip your sources. So make sure you're playing around that whenever you're making your game plan. And then when ahead, always consider a Zulongmon. I kind of touched about this a little bit, but this is something you got to keep in mind. If you are starting to get pretty far behind, you have to keep in mind that really their only comeback potential is going to be a Zulongmon. You can play around this a couple ways. One is a memory blocker, because they have to gain the memory with a Zulong to be able to digivolve for 5 and keep it their turn most of the time. So if you make it so they can't gain the memory, then going into a Zulong, they're going to pass turn, and that's going to be a lot less threatening, because then you have ways to deal with it. You could start swinging in so you have less Digimon on board. But another thing is, if you're ahead red and you have like 4 Digimon on board with no sources, keep in mind that if you don't have the memory blocker, that they could go into a Zulong, swing for those 5 checks, and then potentially go in for a hybrid after. So once you get towards the late game, if you're still an advantage, try to disperse out your Digimon a little bit. Try to keep maybe 1, 2 of them on the board, bigger stacks instead of going 4 wide, just because if you're in that position to where you're going to be able to win anyway, you don't want to give them that Azulong win condition. Now, some lists are playing 1 Azulong, some are playing none, so it's starting to deplete a little bit, but Azulong is still a very good card. It really is the only high security comeback potential besides something like Susanomon, which is also kind of died out in these decks. So just be sure you're considering Azulongmon if you're going to be able to think about how can I lose. Always think of Azulong. It's a very strong card. It's really their only comeback potential, but you can play around it. And then the last tip I have for you is just don't mentally quit. Yes, tier 0 decks are very annoying. We've had tier 0 decks in basically every card game forever. We'll probably have it again here in the Digimon card game as well. And yes, it can get very annoying seeing the same deck win over and over again, especially when it's a deck that you might not find fun like Blue Hybrid because it just stuns so much. The thing is, if you give up mentally, then you're not even going to be looking for ways to win. You want to find ways to better your approach at the matchup, ways to better your deck at the matchup, figure out how you can beat it, give yourself the best chance to win. Even if it's still a hard, potentially disadvantaged chance, you still want the chance to win. So you don't want to give up mentally. You want to make sure that you keep your head in the game to be able to go in and win, and just don't give up. Alright, well that's going to be today's video. As somebody who's played a lot of Blue Hybrid, I was able to start finding a little bit of cracks in the armor of Blue Hybrid, so I wanted to share it with you all. We do have Ultimate Cup coming up this weekend as well as next weekend, and we have another 3-4 weeks of BT7 until BT8 comes out with the delays, so make sure you want to get these tips to you so that way you can use them, try to utilize them to maybe have a better time at these Ultimate Cups and the rest of BT7 versus the Blue Hybrid meta. But with that being said, if you enjoyed, be sure to like and subscribe. Let me know down below if this is something that you enjoyed and you'd want me to do more of. But with that being said, I'll catch you all next time. Peace out.